Thanks very much, Helen, and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to hear about our report and to discuss some of its findings. IPPR North is, I think, the only Westminster-based think tank with a proper presence outside of the Westminster bubble. And one of the things that we think is most important about the work that we do is the way in which we discuss and engage with people in the north of England about some of the challenges facing us here, and also some of the fantastic opportunities and the potential that there is in the north of England. We've been here for 11 years now, and this is our second State of the North report, and we're really, really keen that today is an opportunity for you all to have your say about how you think the north of England is progressing, and also the kind of research that we need to do into the future. So do enjoy the day and make the most of this opportunity. I want to thank, in particular, WIG and Friends Provident Foundation for supporting our work. I particularly want to thank at the outset Luke Rakes, who's here, and Marcus Johns, who did all the number crunching throughout the summer, which are behind many of the ideas and graphs, to put it bluntly, in the report that have driven the thinking that I'm going to be sharing with you now. And I wanted to sort of kick off by asking the question, so what actually is the Northern Powerhouse? And I think if you listen to some of the Chancellor's speeches, I think that he wraps kind of four ideas together. Firstly, this idea that cities are the key drivers of growth in the north of England, and this idea that if you bring lots of businesses and firms and skilled peoples together in cities, then that is good for the economy. I think there's a critique of that narrative, but that's broadly behind one aspect of what he says when he talks about the Northern Powerhouse. The second dimension is that if you get the combined economic mass, if you like, of those cities together, that might act as a counterweight to London and to, if you like, rebalance the economy. But in order to get that combined economic mass, you need good connectivity. So that's a third dimension of I think what the Chancellor is about when he talks about the Northern Powerhouse. And then intermixed within that, and the subject of some debate as to whether this is part of the Northern Powerhouse or not, is this notion of devolution and driving down power, particularly to city regions, in order that they can shape their own economies in their own way. And I think all four of these things get caught up in what the Chancellor means by Northern Powerhouse. But what we've tried to do today in our report is to actually say that if this Northern Powerhouse idea is going to have any real meaning or benefit for the people of the north of England, then there are four things that it's really got to do in the longer term if we're going to see it to be beneficial. The first is that it's got to develop a much more resilient economy, not like the, if you like, unequal economy, the overheated economy we see in London. So we're not trying to recreate London in the north. We need a more resilient economy. The second thing, and this has been the kind of subject of the headlines today, is that we need to build on our greatest asset, which is our people, and we need to do that by starting young. The third test that we're setting for the Northern Powerhouse is that we need to invest more in infrastructure, something you've heard us say, of course, before, and indeed in innovation as well. So investment in the future is absolutely critical, and that we need to see the whole process being more democratic. And the people of the north of England have got to kind of own this Northern Powerhouse project to a much greater degree than perhaps they do at the moment. And so in order to sort of challenge thinking about this, we've set four tests. And for each of those four tests, we've set 2 or 3 benchmarks so that we know over the next 15 to 20 years whether or not this Northern Powerhouse idea is really working. So the first test is around prosperity and the economy. And we've got 3 big kind of problems that are all interlinked in the north of England around prosperity. The first is to do with productivity. And this graph shows you, if you like, a picture of our low productivity in the north of England. Our productivity is okay in certain pockets. In places like Cumbria and Cheshire and Warrington, actually, we have quite high productivity. But generally speaking, our productivity is nearly 11% lower than the national average. And this is a kind of fundamental problem with our northern economy. I'm not going to try and point to all the details in these graphs, but just to say that they're all in the report and they're all spelt out in some detail in the report. So if you want to go away and look at the real detail, then you can do that. The second big problem that we have in the north of England is that we have very low employment rates. Again, we have some pockets of places where the employment rates are much higher, and Yorkshire and Humber as a whole actually is doing really quite well in terms of employment rates. But on average, there is a 3% gap between the employment rate in the north and the employment rate of the national average. And so to that extent, we've got a second challenge around employment. This is compounded by the fact that many people want to work but can't work. And so this graph shows you the three northern regions on the left-hand side. The dark-coloured boxes are our rates of unemployment in these different places. The hashed boxes are the rates of people who are economically inactive, but they say they want to work. And so you can see what we have actually is a picture of wasted potential, of people who either are seeking work but can't find it, or who want to look for work but recognise at the moment they're going to struggle to get a job. So what we're arguing is that linked to our low employment rate is that there's huge wasted potential in the north of England. The third dimension of our economic problem is low pay, which again is something that I'm sure many of us are aware of and have reflected on over the past couple of years. The median gross hourly pay in the north of England, and so the darker coloured lines you can see rising from 2004 through to 2014 are the three northern regions. The top dotted coloured line is London. The gap is around about £5 per hour. So that's the difference in median gross hourly pay between the northern regions and London. And so we have this particular problem. So all in all, in terms of the economy, we have this triple whammy of low productivity, low employment, and low pay. And we've got to kind of reverse all of those things if this northern powerhouse is going to mean anything at all. So what we've set is a number of indicators or benchmarks. We think we need to increase labour productivity by £8.50 an hour so that we halve our productivity gap in relation to the UK average. We've got to create 600,000 new good quality jobs. That again would halve the gap between our current employment rate and the national full employment rate. And then we also need to reduce the proportion of people who are working in the north of England but are working on low pay. This is a very daunting task, and many of our IPPR North reports get into the detail of this and how we do it. We're not this morning setting out new policy proposals as to how we go about doing it, but this is the challenge that we think faces the Northern Powerhouse if we're going to make it work. The second test that we've got relates to what you might want to call human capital, the fact that people are our biggest asset and we have to build on our skills. We think that in the context of the Northern Powerhouse debate, far too little is said about skills in comparison with infrastructure and transport in particular. And even when we do talk about skills, we largely focus on adult skills and apprenticeships and that kind of things, which are very important, but what we have recognised through the new research that we have been doing is that actually the problems around our skills system start at the very earliest age. So this graph shows you the children at different deciles of poverty. So the orange dots at the bottom are those that are in the lowest 10%, the poorest 10% of children. And it's the level of development they have reached by the age of 5. And this is measured through this standard called the good level of development. So in terms of how we measure children at the age of 5, what we find is children in the north of England are 12 percentage points behind those in London before even the age of 5. And we think this is absolutely critical because what happens then, if I move on, we call it the early years gap. What we find then is that same cohort of children are the same children that then are struggling when it comes to GCSEs. So you carry this disadvantage, if you like, through your lifetime. And so what we see here is that GCSEs, once again, are lower in the north of England compared to the English average. There are little bits of chinks of light and success stories here, actually. There are certain areas which are doing quite well in relation to catching up with the national average in relation to GCSEs, and that's quite important for us to remember. But the broader picture is that our skills system, if you like, our education system has problems even before the age of 5, and so we have to tackle those if we're going to make the Northern Powerhouse a success in the future. And here's the kind of big challenge in relation to skills. This graph shows you the kind of skills demand that is going to be there in the economy by 2022. And you can see the skills level 3 and then 4 to 6 are where all the demand is coming from. What we know is that 3/4 of new jobs by 2022 will require level 3 skills or above. That's 2.4 million jobs are going to require that level of skills. So that's the challenge before us if we're going to meet this demand. Just to put it into very real terms, one of the reasons I understand why the Transpennine electrification was paused was quite simply that as a country we do not have the electrical engineering skills in order to actually carry out the work that needs to be done. And if we're talking about all this new infrastructure investment we need to see, then we're going to have to create the skilled people to be able to carry out some of those work. So it's a very real challenge that's facing most sectors of the economy going forward. So that's our third test. Our second test, and what we're arguing here in terms of indicators is that we've got to catch up with the national rate of early years attainment, we've got to close the gap in GCSE attainment, and we've got to try and meet this projected demand from employers for skilled workers with level 3 qualifications or above. Those are the things that will really tell us in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years' time whether or not this Northern Powerhouse thing is working. Our third test is around investing in the future. And again, forgive me for a rather complicated and difficult graph to immediately appreciate on the screen here. But the thing to look at here, this is a graph which shows investment in research and development, which we're using as an indicator of our investment in innovation, how we drive innovation in the northern economy. But if you focus on the orange columns, these again are all the regions, if you focus on the orange columns are government investment in research and development. What you can see here is that in the north of England, and you can see to the sort of far left the northern columns, government investment in research and development is significantly less than businesses invest in research and development. Now, there's no kind of fixed proportion as to exactly how much government should invest compared to businesses, but the crucial thing and the interesting thing is that government investment in research and development in London, and in particular the South East, and you can see this rocketing column in the South East, is far higher than private sector investment. And for a government that so often argues that we should be doing what business is doing, following the market by way of investment, what we can show here is that government would need to double its amount of investment in research and development in the north if it was to even match what businesses are currently doing. And I would say there's even an argument, particularly around our poor productivity in the north, that businesses themselves should be investing a lot more in R&D in the north of England than they currently do. So you've got a real challenge there. And then in terms of investment in transport, you've seen IPPR North statistics that we've rolled out time and time again about the disproportionate investment in transport per head, or infrastructure per head. I think you may know, we invest as a nation, we're planning to invest as a nation around about £3,000 per person in London and the South East, compared to, say, £400, £500 in the north of England over the next 10 to 15 years. This presents this data in a slightly different way, because one of the challenges that people often come back to us and say is, oh yes, but if you were to take Crossrail out, actually it wouldn't look quite so bad. Well, what we've done here is we've taken Crossrail out, but what we've also done is shown the impact of Sellafield on northwest infrastructure spending. So if you take out Crossrail and you take out Sellafield, you'll see that actually infrastructure investment in the north of England looks even worse than our normal stats show. So there's some real challenges about how we invest in this Northern Powerhouse and make particularly that transport connectivity really work for us. So our third tests, our third indicators are that we need to see investment in research and development match the very best regions in Europe. We've done some benchmarking across Europe, and we think that we only need to get up to about sort of 1.8% of GDP investment, and we would catch the rest of Europe, which would be significant. And then the other indicator is not actually about money and how much we invest in transport. We've put our indicator to be the volume of commuter travel between the major cities of the north of England, because that really is what we're trying to get to in relation to our northern economy, a broader labour market that businesses can draw upon the skills from a much wider group of people than they currently do. Our last test then is around democracy. We think this is, again, the kind of missing piece of the jigsaw that people don't talk enough about when it comes to the Northern Powerhouse. This graph shows you voter turnout at the last general election, which is one measure that you can use. And again, you'll see the darker coloured columns are those in the north of England. Not too far behind, to be honest, the national average in relation to turnout at the general election. But some places, turnout was around about 52%, I think, in some of the most, where people turned out least across the north of England. So there are some quite big discrepancies within that. Equally, we think there are some big issues around the balance of power between central and local government. We know that this has an impact on how people feel in terms of their ability to influence things. And so this graph shows you, it's quite a survey question which is relatively technical. It's the extent to which people agree or disagree that the balance of power between central and local government is the correct one. And what you can see from this graph is that people, particularly in Wales, but then the North East, and you'll see further down Yorkshire and Humber, disproportionately feel that that the balance of power is not good between central and local government. I think it's quite interesting that actually the North West and London fare best on this characteristic, and I wonder why that is, and whether it's the fact that you've got a mayor in London and a sense that the North West, or Manchester, Greater Manchester in particular, is sort of feeling the benefits of devolution, that actually people there feel the balance of power between central and local government is slightly better than people's perceptions elsewhere. But that, I think, is quite interesting. The bottom line, though, for us is that we think that we've got to see the Northern Powerhouse tackle some of these issues around the democratic deficit. So we think that the balance of power between the number of people who actually think that balance of power is getting better needs to improve if we're to genuinely feel that this powerhouse is having an effect. Equally, people need to feel much greater sense of public influence and efficacy, and again there are survey measurements to actually show how people are changing in relation to how effective they feel. We think that needs to improve as well. And we also think that a good indicator will be the number of people who actually turn out and vote in the mayoral elections that we're going to see in May 2017. That too will tell us whether Osborne's big push for directly elected mayors across city regions is worthwhile. So those are our 4 tests and our different indicators. But my kind of final message to you is that we think on the whole the Northern Powerhouse idea is a very good one, but it is still a concept. It does still need to be given, if you like, flesh and bones. But it's not for government to tell us what that flesh and bones needs to look like. It's not for government to dictate what kind of economy we want to see in the north of England. And so, to that extent, I think our main message coming out of the report today is to say, let's try and reinvent the north of England from the bottom up. Let's try and ourselves decide what we want the Northern Powerhouse to be. Thank you.